The luxurious Grand Palace Hotel shone like a jewel in the heart of New York City. Its crystal chandeliers poured golden light over the Italian marble lobby, where society's elite moved with the ease of those accustomed to privilege. On that Friday night, a particular group caught attention. 5 young adults, all in their mid-20s, occupied the leather sofas of the lobby bar as if they owned the place. Luke Mercer, 27, heir to one of the country's largest construction companies, led the group with his usual air of superiority. Beside him, Megan Rothschild, 25, a digital influencer with millions of followers, absently adjusted her perfectly styled blonde hair while checking the latest likes on her profile. Philip Turner, son of a senator, played with the keys to his latest acquisition, an imported sports car that cost more than many apartments. Completing the group were the siblings Brianna and Richard Montgomery, heirs to a chain of private hospitals. The quintet was celebrating the end of another week of success, as they used to call their days filled with social gatherings and exclusive parties. Glasses of French champagne circulated among them as they shared laughs and comments about the latest high society events. "Did you see Valerie's last party? That decoration must have cost a fortune, but honestly, it was tacky," commented Megan, rolling her eyes as she took a sip of her drink. "Well, not everyone has our good taste," replied Brianna with an affected smile. "Speaking of which, Luke, how are the preparations for your birthday next month? I heard you're going to close an entire resort in the Hamptons." Luke smiled with satisfaction. "Actually, I changed my mind. I'm going to do something even more exclusive. I'm negotiating to have the party in a castle in Tuscany. I'll fly everyone there on a private jet." It was at that moment that an unusual figure caught the group's attention. A man of about 60 had just entered the hotel. His simple clothes, jeans, plaid shirt, and worn leather boots contrasted drastically with the refined environment. The straw hat he carried in his hands had clear marks of constant use, and his tanned skin betrayed a life under the sun. "Guys, look who decided to venture into the big city," whispered Richard, barely containing his laughter. "Do you think?" He realized the farm hotel is on the other side of the city. The man, apparently oblivious to the looks and comments, headed to the reception desk. His posture was calm, and his movements demonstrated a natural dignity that seemed unshaken by the surroundings. As he conversed with the receptionist, the group of young adults began to amuse themselves at his expense. "Hey, Megan, record this. For your Instagram, it's going to blow up," suggested Philip, already grabbing his own phone to capture the moment. Megan hesitated for a second. "I don't know, guys. Maybe we shouldn't." "Come on, Meg. Since when do you have pity? Wasn't it you who said your content needs more engagement?" Luke provoked. The influencer seemed to ponder for a moment, but the desire for more views spoke louder. Discreetly, she began recording stories, adding mocking captions about the hillbilly lost in the 5-star hotel. The man finished his conversation with the receptionist and headed to one of the lobby armchairs close to the group. He ordered a coffee from one of the passing waiters, his calm and polite voice contrasting with the muffled giggles coming from the group of young adults. Luke, encouraged by the drink and the attention of his friends, decided to go further. He stood up and walked over to the man, followed by the eager glances of his companions. "Excuse me, sir," he said with false cordiality. "I think you might be a little lost. The farmers' market, where they sell rural products, is a few blocks from here." The man raised his eyes to Luke, and for a brief moment something passed through his gaze. It wasn't anger or embarrassment, but something deeper, like someone who had seen too much of life to be shaken by juvenile provocations. "Thank you for your concern, young man," he responded with a slight country accent, his voice surprisingly firm and clear. "But I believe I'm exactly where I should be." The serene response seemed to irritate Luke, who wasn't used to not having the last word. "Look, I'll be more direct then. This is a luxury hotel with daily rates that probably cost more than your entire monthly income. Are you sure you wouldn't, prefer to look for a more suitable inn for your profile?" The group of friends observed the scene with a mixture of amusement and expectation, while Megan continued filming discreetly. The man took a sip of his freshly arrived coffee, placed the cup on the table delicately, and slowly stood up. "You're Right about one thing, young man, he said, adjusting his simple shirt. This is indeed a luxury hotel. And as for my profile, he paused, his eyes scanning the group of young adults. Perhaps it's time for you to learn that not everything is as it seems. Before Luke could respond, the hotel manager appeared hurriedly, his face red with concern. Mr. Vincent, forgive me for not receiving you personally. If I had known you were coming today. The smile on Luke's face began to wither, while his friends shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Megan lowered her phone quickly, her face losing color as she realized what was happening. Vincent Anderson, the man they had just tried to humiliate, was much more than he appeared. Owner of one of the largest luxury hotel chains in North America, he was known in the business world for his discretion and for having built his empire from scratch, starting as a simple farm worker. The silence that followed was deafening. The young adults who moments before were overflowing with confidence and arrogance now seemed to have shrunk in their expensive seats. Vincent merely observed, his gaze carrying the weight of someone who knew both the value of work and the futility of ostentation. The hotel manager, Albert Sanders, didn't know where to hide his face. In his 15 years managing the Grand Palace, he had never imagined finding himself in such a delicate situation. Vincent Anderson, the owner who rarely appeared personally at the properties, was there, right in front of him, and had been disrespected, right under his nose. Mr. Anderson, I can explain. Albert began, but Vincent interrupted him with a gentle gesture. No need to worry, Albert, he said, his voice maintaining the same calm as before. Actually, this situation interests me quite a bit. Luke and his group remained paralyzed, as if some spell had frozen them in place. Megan had let her phone fall into her lap, all her pretensions of viral content forgotten in the face of the reality that presented itself. Young people, Vincent addressed the group. Since we're all here, how about a conversation? Albert, please reserve the first-floor meeting room for us. It wasn't a request, despite the gentle tone. The 5 young adults looked at each other, but they knew they had no choice. In silence, they followed Vincent to the elevator while other guests observed the scene with curiosity. The meeting room was elegant, with a mahogany table that gleamed under the soft lighting. Vincent indicated the chairs for everyone to sit down and occupied the head of the table. For a few moments, he just observed each of the young adults as if he was reading their stories just by looking. Do you know why I built this hotel chain? He finally asked, surprising everyone with the unexpected question. No one answered. Vincent continued. When I was a child, I worked on the farm with my father. We had a small property that barely provided for our sustenance. One day, we needed to travel to the city to solve some documentation problems. We didn't have money for a hotel, so we slept in the car. He paused, his eyes lost in distant memories. It was there that I promised myself, one day I would build places where people would feel welcomed, regardless of their origin or appearance. Brianna Montgomery shifted uncomfortably in her chair. For the first time that night, the shame on her face seemed genuine. What you did today, Vincent continued, was not just disrespecting me. You disrespected everything this place represents, every employee who works here, every guest who chooses us, every detail designed to make people feel special. Richard tried to speak. Mr. Anderson, we didn't know. And does that make any difference? Vincent interrupted him, his voice still calm, but carrying a firmness that made Richard swallow hard. Would you treat someone with more respect? If you knew they were rich, that only proves my point. Megan, who until then had kept her eyes fixed on the table, finally found the courage to speak. I posted stories mocking you. I'll delete everything right now and... No, said Vincent, surprising everyone again. Don't delete it, leave it there. Sometimes we need to live with the consequences of our choices to really learn from them. Luke, who had maintained an atypical silence throughout the conversation, finally spoke up. Are you going to kick us out of the hotel? Vincent smiled, but it was a different smile now. There was something challenging about it. No, Luke, I have something much more interesting in mind. You 5 seem to need a lesson on value, work, and respect, and I'm going to give you that opportunity. The group looked at each other, apprehensive. Vincent stood up and walked to the window, observing the illuminated city outside. "Starting tomorrow," he continued, "each of you will work in one of my hotels, not as guests or executives, but starting from the bottom, as I started, for a whole month." The reaction was immediate. Philip Turner almost fell off his chair. "Work, but I've never—" "Exactly," Vincent interrupted him. "You've never really worked in your life. It's time to start. Unless, of course, you prefer that I share with your parents and the press the security camera video showing how their children behave when they think no one important is watching." The silence that followed was deafening. Megan was pale, probably imagining the impact such a scandal would have on her influencer career. Luke, for the first time in his life, seemed truly at a loss for words. "You'll have different functions," Vincent continued. "Megan, you'll work in the laundry. Luke, in maintenance. Philip, in the kitchen. Brianna and Richard, in room cleaning. And don't try to cheat the system. Each manager will personally report your performance to me." "For a whole month," whispered Brianna, her voice trembling slightly. "1 month," Vincent confirmed. "Enough time to learn some valuable lessons, and don't worry, you'll receive the same salary as any other entry-level employee." The businessman sat down again, his gaze scanning each of the young adults. "You have until tomorrow morning to decide. Either you accept my proposal, or you'll deal with the consequences of your actions becoming public. The choice is yours." With these words, Vincent stood up and walked to the door. Before leaving, he turned one last time. "Oh, and one more thing. During this month, you'll live in the employee accommodations. No luxury apartments or perks. Sometimes we need to step out of our comfort zone to really see the world as it is." The door closed softly behind him, leaving 5 shocked young adults, each lost in their own thoughts about how their lives were about to change drastically. The silence in the room was heavy, laden with regret and apprehension for what was to come. The first week of work was a reality shock for the 5 young adults. The employee accommodation, although clean and organized, was a completely different world from the luxurious environments they were used to: shared rooms, common bathrooms, and a routine that started before sunrise. Megan, on her first day in the laundry, faced endless piles of sheets and towels with an expression of helplessness. Her perfectly manicured nails were already showing signs of wear, and her blonde hair was tied in a simple bun without the expensive products she used to use. "It's not as hard as it looks," said Mrs. Zoe, a 60-year-old lady who had worked there for 2 decades. "Come, I'll teach you the right way to fold." Initially, Megan wanted to resist, but something in Mrs. Zoe's gentleness made her swallow her pride and pay attention. Gradually, she began to understand the rhythm of the work and, surprisingly, found unexpected satisfaction in seeing the piles of clothes perfectly organized. In the kitchen, Philip faced his own challenges. Used to frequenting the best restaurants, he was now on the other side, peeling potatoes and washing pans. Chef Joe, a stern but fair man, gave him no respite. "Turner, these pans still have grease. Do it again," ordered Joe, his voice echoing through the kitchen. Philip felt his face burn with anger and shame. He was about to respond when he noticed something. The chef called everyone by their last name. It wasn't a personal provocation. And more importantly, everyone there worked with a purpose, a dignity he had never noticed before. Luke, in maintenance, discovered that his delicate hands were not prepared for heavy work. On the 3rd day, he already had blisters on his fingers and back pains. His supervisor, Mr. Anthony, a man of few words, just observed his efforts with an enigmatic look. "Kid," said Mr. Anthony during a break, "have you ever thought about why things work in this hotel?" Luke, exhausted, just shook his head. "Because every screw, every light bulb, every detail matters, and there's someone taking care of all this. Someone you've never seen, but who makes your stay comfortable." Those words hit Luke like a punch in the stomach. How many times had he complained about small problems in hotels, without ever thinking about the people who worked to solve them? The Montgomery siblings, Brianna and Richard, discovered that cleaning rooms was an art in itself. Every detail needed to be perfect, every corner impeccable. Sandra, the head housekeeper, was rigorous in her inspections. "You have 20 minutes per room," she explained. Guests pay for perfection, and that's what we're going to deliver. Brianna, who had never made her own bed, was now learning to make military corners on the sheets. Richard, who used to leave his clothes scattered on the floor of his apartment, now understood the value of organization. In the employee cafeteria, during meals, the 5 young adults began to sit together, sharing their experiences. They were no longer the superficial conversations about parties and shopping, but honest accounts of discoveries and difficulties. "Have you seen Vincent since that day?" asked Megan, as she ate her meal, surprisingly tasty, prepared by the kitchen team. "No," answered Luke, massaging his sore shoulders. "But I'm sure he's following everything." Indeed, Vincent observed the young adults' progress through daily reports from the supervisors. Every small change, every learning moment was recorded and analyzed. One afternoon, during her shift in the laundry, Megan found a forgotten cell phone in a pocket. It was an expensive model, the latest release. Her first impulse was to keep it. After all, no one would know, but something had changed in her. "Mrs. Zoe," she called, handing the device to the supervisor. "I found this in the clothes from room 507. Mrs. Zoe's approving smile made her feel a different kind of pride from any like she had ever received on her social networks. Philip, after 2 weeks in the kitchen, began to show a genuine interest in gastronomy. Chef Joe caught him several times making notes about techniques and recipes. "Turner," the chef called one day, "want to learn how to make bechamel sauce?" The smile on Philip's face was genuine, perhaps the first in many days. Luke discovered he had a talent for solving practical problems. Mr. Anthony began to trust him with more complex tasks, and the satisfaction of fixing something broken was inexplicably gratifying. The Montgomery siblings developed an efficient teamwork system. Where there was once competition and rivalry, now there was cooperation. They discovered that together they could clean rooms faster and with better quality. By the end of the 3rd week, something had fundamentally changed in that group. It wasn't just the appearance, the simple clothes, the calloused hands, the tired but satisfied faces. It was something deeper, a transformation that was beginning to manifest in small gestures and attitudes. One day during breakfast, Richard observed, "You know something? I had never really talked to the people who work in the hotels we frequent. I had never been interested in their stories." "I know," Brianna replied thoughtfully. "It's like they were invisible to us. And now we are them," Megan completed. "And we discovered that there's much more value here than we ever imagined." The group fell silent, reflecting on how much their perspectives had changed in such a short time. The month of work was almost over, but the lessons they were learning promised to last much longer than that. On the morning of the last day of the month, Vincent Anderson returned to the Grand Palace Hotel. This time he wasn't dressed as a farmer, but maintained the same simplicity in his well-cut suit. He gathered the 5 young adults again in the meeting room where it all had started. The contrast between that first meeting and now was striking. They were no longer the arrogant young adults from a month ago. They sat at the table with a different posture, their gazes carrying the weight of experience and learning. "Well," Vincent began, "we've reached the end of our agreement. Before any decision, I'd like to hear from you. What have you learned this month?" There was a moment of silence until Megan gathered the courage to speak first. "I learned about invisibility," she said, her voice firm. "As an influencer, I always wanted to be seen, always sought visibility. But working in the laundry, I understood that I had made invisible all the people who made my life comfortable. Mrs. Betty taught me more about real influence than all my years on social media." Vincent nodded, turning his gaze to Phil. "The kitchen," Phil began, a small smile appearing on his face, "changed my view on everything. Every dish that comes out of there carries dedication, knowledge, art. Chef Joe showed me that true luxury isn't just eating in expensive places, but understanding and respecting the creation process." Luke, who kept his hands crossed on the piano's table, hands now calloused from work, was next. "Mr. Tony taught me that every problem has a solution, but we need to be willing to get our hands dirty to solve it. It's not about having money or power, It's about commitment and responsibility. The Montgomery siblings looked at each other, and Brooke took the floor. Richard and I always competed for everything: attention, recognition, status. But cleaning. Rooms together, we learned that cooperation is more valuable than competition. Each perfect room was a shared victory. And we discovered, Richard added, that there's no inferior work. There are just people doing the best they can in their roles. Sandra taught us that excellence has nothing to do with position, but with attitude. Vincent listened to each one attentively, his face revealing satisfaction with the responses. He stood up and walked to the window, observing the movement of the hotel below. "When I built this empire," he said, "it wasn't for the money or status. It was to create places where people could feel truly welcomed. But for that, we need a team that understands the real value of work and respect." He turned to the group. "The month is over. You're free to return to your previous lives, but before that I have a proposal for each of you." He took 5 envelopes from his briefcase and distributed them. "In each envelope, there's a real job. Offer in my companies, not in management or privileged positions, but in roles where you can continue learning and growing. The choice is yours." The young adults opened their envelopes with trembling hands. Megan found a proposal to work in the internal communications department, developing employee appreciation programs. Phil received an invitation to a trainee program in the gastronomy area. Luke had an offer for the maintenance management team. The Montgomery siblings were invited to the quality management sector. "But our parents," Brooke began. "I've already spoken with all of them," Vincent interrupted. "I explained the situation and how you've developed this month. They're surprised and proud." Megan looked at her envelope, then at her phone, which had barely rung that month. "You know," she said, "I have millions of followers who have never really seen me. But here I learned what it means to really make a difference in people's lives." "True influence," Vincent smiled, "isn't in the number of followers, but in the impact we have on others' lives." Luke stood up, extending his hand to Vincent. "You could have exposed us, humiliated us. Instead, you gave us a chance to learn and grow. I accept your proposal." One by one, the others also stood up, accepting the challenge to continue this journey of transformation. "Great," said Vincent, a gleam of satisfaction in his eyes, "because I have big plans for you. We're going to revolutionize the way luxury hotels treat their employees, and you, with the experience you've had, will be fundamental in this process." That afternoon, when they left the meeting room, they were no longer the same young adults who had mocked a farmer a month ago. They carried with them lessons that no inheritance could buy: the value of honest work, respect for all human beings, and the understanding that true wealth isn't measured by material possessions. As they walked through the hotel lobby, they greeted each employee by name, with genuine smiles and true respect. And when they passed by the reception, where it all had started, they paused for a moment. "It seems like it was a lifetime ago," Megan commented. "And it was," Luke replied, "a life that taught us more than all our years of privilege." Vincent. He observed the group from his office on the top floor, a satisfied smile on his face. His strategy had worked better than he had expected. He hadn't just taught a lesson to 5 spoiled young adults. He had transformed potential problems into solutions, converting arrogance into humility and privilege into purpose. The sun was setting over the city, casting a golden light through the windows of the Palazzo Hotel. Somewhere, Mrs. Betty was organizing another pile of towels, Chef Joe was preparing the next day's menu, Mr. Tony was checking another piece of equipment, and Sandra was inspecting another room. And now 5 transformed young adults finally understood the value of each of these gestures, of each of these people. And so, what began as an attempt at humiliation transformed into a journey of discovery, growth, and redemption. The Palazzo Hotel, which had always been a symbol of luxury and exclusivity, now held a different story. The story of how a person's true value isn't in the clothes they wear or the money they possess, but in the character they demonstrate and the respect they offer to others. Dear listeners, We hope this story has touched your hearts as much as it transformed the lives of these 5 young adults. To continue this journey of reflection and personal growth, we've prepared a special playlist with equally inspiring stories. Find it here by clicking the link on the left. If this narrative resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life and make us reflect on our values. Share in the comments. Have you ever lived an experience that completely changed your way of seeing the world? We're eager to hear your stories of transformation.